Paola Ugaz, or Paola Margot Ugaz Cruz, is an investigative journalist who has become known for her work, which exposed a massive child abuse scandal within the SCV. She has worked in news media and journalism in some capacity since 1999, and prior to co-authoring Half Monks, Half Soldiers, she wrote several books exposing political corruption and human rights abuses. It is pretty clear to me that Ugaz is a woman of conviction who believes in fighting for human rights. In the 2010s, she worked on the Chelina de la Esperanza initiative, which sought to honor victims of the politically motivated Peruvian Shining Path conflict. During that same time period, she began investigating alleged cases of sexual, physical, and psychological abuse of young boys committed under the auspices of the Sodalitium. Pedro Salinas was Ugaz's co-worker, which I would imagine made her work with Salinas even more meaningful. Their work and the publication of their book ultimately became the linchpin in the Peruvian government launching an investigation and in Fagari being sanctioned by the Vatican. But it wasn't all sunshine and roses. In July of 2018, 3 years after the publication of Half Monks, Half Soldiers, the Archbishop of Piura, a man named Yugirin Anselmi, filed criminal defamation suits against both Salinas and Ugaz over previous investigative reports in which Anselmi was named as not only complicit in SCV's abuses, but also of land trafficking in Piura. Stay tuned for part 2 of this miniseries, in which I will go into more depth about the SCV's alleged land trafficking, tax evasion, and fraud. But as far as these defamation suits go, Anselmi would eventually win his case against Salinas, but withdrew both complaints after a bunch of negative criticism from secular and ecclesial sectors. He would eventually go on to receive disciplinary action from the Vatican for these stunts. Despite that, Ugaz continued to suffer harassment in the form of legal notices from individuals and associations with ties to the SCV accusing her of defamation, because once Ugaz learned that there were abuses occurring within the Sodalitium, she just kept digging. In a 2023 interview, she shared that while the developments with the SCV put her and Salinas' book and work center stage, they suffered a retaliatory barrage of disinformation. A disinformation ecosystem was created. A group of journalists began to look for and invent lies about me and Pedro, and that's how it all begins. They write bizarre things like I trade uranium and plutonium with Morgana Vargas Llosa in the north of the country, and that is why we want the Sodalitio to leave. The feedback was like that. They invented the news and in turn published it in the newspapers with covers and everything, sent it to the prosecutor's office, and used politicians to tell them to open an investigation into me and Pedro. Since 2018, I have always been in demand. I am in danger. In this country, there is preventive detention. That is, I can go to jail at the request of the prosecutor's office, and they can take many measures. In fact, in the document where they notify me of the latest demand, they state, among other things, that my communications be lifted. In other words, the lifting of communications is very serious, because, of course, they want to access my communications with victims. There are a lot of victims of sexual abuse. They are vulnerable people among the vulnerable, and they want to access that. That is serious because it is a disastrous precedent. I want to spend just a moment talking about what they put this woman through, because it is pretty sobering, and the links that people attached to the SCV and Opus Dei will go to in order to cover their asses. And yes, of course, Opus Dei is wrapped up in this. The Archbishop of Piura and Tombs filed those false criminal defamation suits against Ugaz for having the gall to tweet about him and the sketchy religious organizations that he was attached to. And then a businessman named Alberto Gomez de la Torre filed 2 suits against Ugaz for alleged false statements and for participating in an Al Jazeera documentary called The Sodalitium Scandal. In 2020, the director of a Catholic news site, La Abeja, Luciano Reveredo, filed a criminal defamation lawsuit against Ugaz for daring to say that La Abeja had been defamatory and misogynistic in their coverage of her legal battles. In 2021, the Peruvian Public Prosecutor's Office opened a scam investigation into Ugaz in relation to alleged money laundering, an accusation that was supported with apparently fake WhatsApp messages. In 2022, a trial court acquitted Ugaz in the defamation case brought against her by Reveredo. And I'm not sure about the current status of her other legal disputes, but in light of everything that we have gone over, it truly does appear as if Ugaz and also Pedro Salinas have been the targets of a coordinated attack employing defamation laws to try to suppress discussions of matters of public concern. The impact these types of legal games have on the free exchange of information and discussion of the issues being raised cannot be overstated. It is an abuse of these institutions and systems to the grossest extent. Ugaz's work has been so impactful and important to the people of Peru that she inspired a play titled Proyecto Ugaz, in which Ugaz appeared as a key figure in the tireless search for justice for the victims of the abuse networks linked to the sodalitium. Her courage and conviction in defending her research, herself, and her family inspired director Diego Gargovich to tell the story on the stage. In an interview, Gargovich was quoted saying, "If journalism through the written word reveals corruption, theater turns it into a collective cry because theater is community." The influence that SCV has wielded and their clear willingness to use it against any who have attempted to expose the links of their corruption and what it must feel like to have the full force of their influence coming to bear truly cannot be stressed too much. It boggles the mind, and I can only imagine how Ugaz and Salinas have felt going through this experience, dealing with this insane organization. I have so much respect for Salinas and for all of the victims who were brave enough to speak out, and for Ugaz, who has continuously refused to back down, even as her life and liberty and the safety of her family have been threatened by the same corrupt system that she's been fighting to expose. Knowing more about the abuses that the victims likely endured and the price that Ugaz and Salinas have had to pay for attempting to expose it all makes the following developments in the SCV's story all the more impactful.